Elymas is the heir to the Edvon family, and today is finally the day he is going to undergo the ritual of divine blessing. But ever since he was little, whenever he saw or learned something new, he would get a strange feeling of déjà vu, as though he had experienced it somewhere before, almost like he had played a game with the exact same plot before. But no matter how much he thought about it, he could never figure out why. As he is about to begin the ritual, his father notices that he seems a little nervous, so he tells him not to worry and to simply have faith in the god of the sword. The priest then begins chanting the incantation for the ritual, and as Elymas listens to the words, the strange feeling of déjà vu suddenly becomes stronger than ever before. All at once, countless memories begin flooding into his mind, and he finally realizes that it was never déjà vu at all. In his previous life, he was an ordinary man who obsessively played an online VR game called Magic World, and this world is exactly the same as the one from that game. Upon realizing that, Elymas can hardly contain his excitement, because he knows practically everything there is to know about this world's classes, skills, monsters, dungeons, hidden quests, and powerful equipment. With all of that knowledge, he is certain that his future is guaranteed to be filled with happiness and success, and more than anything, he hopes to receive his favorite class, Heavy Knight, which was widely considered the most broken class in the entire game. It had a rough start compared to most classes, but once it was fully built, there were very few classes in the game that could hope to compete with it. Once the ritual is complete, Elymas quickly checks his status, and he is overjoyed to find that he really did receive the Heavy Knight class. Unable to contain his excitement, he immediately rushes over to tell his father the good news, but instead of congratulating him, his father looks deeply outraged and disappointed. Elymas is completely shocked by his reaction, and after thinking about it for a moment, he realizes that he accidentally mixed up his memories from the game with this world's common sense. Back in the game, Heavy Knight was one of the strongest classes if the player knew how to build it properly, but in this world, people only judge classes based on their starting abilities. Simple and powerful classes are praised from the very beginning, while technical classes that require years of training before revealing their true potential are regarded as worthless trash. Panicking, Elymas tries to lie about what class he received, but his father forcefully grabs his wrist and checks his status himself. The moment he sees the Heavy Knight class and its unimpressive starting stats, his expression turns furious. Elymas hurriedly tries to explain some of the class's strengths and future potential, but his father refuses to listen. His hand tightens around Elymas's wrist like a vice before he suddenly strikes him across the face. The impact sends Elymas crashing onto the stone floor as pain shoots through his body. His father coldly says that he wasted the divine blessing and is only relieved that the ritual wasn't held in public, because it would have brought great disgrace upon the Edvon family. Before anything else can happen, footsteps suddenly echo throughout the hallway as someone enters the room. It turns out to be Malice, the daughter of the Edvon branch family, and Elymas recognizes her because when they were children, she and Elymas used to play together quite often, but as they grew older, the difference in their status caused them to drift apart, and they haven't spoken to each other in the last 5 years. Elymas immediately gets a bad feeling about this when he sees her, but there is nothing he can do but stand by and watch. Malice requests to undergo the divine blessing as well, and the priest hesitates since the ritual was only prepared for Elymas, but Elymas's father interrupts him and orders him to continue. Once the ritual is complete, Malice checks her status and discovers that she received the Master Swordsman class, the most sought-after class in the kingdom. She flashes Elymas a smug grin, clearly enjoying the fact that she received a class considered far superior to his. And Elymas's heart sinks because the daughter of a branch family obtaining Master Swordsman, while the main heir only received Heavy Knight, is exactly the sort of thing that would humiliate his father and make his mood worse. However, he underestimated just how quickly his father could switch gears, because instead of becoming even angrier, his father begins showering Malice with praise while completely ignoring Elymas, and before long, he proudly announces that from this day onward, Malice will become his daughter and the new heir to the Edvon family. Hearing those words causes Elymas's heart to sink, because if Malice becomes the new heir, then where does that leave him? Malice is really living up to her name here because she continues mocking him, saying she always believed he lacked what it took to shoulder the burden of becoming the Edvon family's heir. Elymas stands there in complete disbelief as his father coldly stares at him before officially deciding to banish him from the family and declaring that he is no longer his son. He calls him a disappointment and orders him to leave the mansion immediately. And Elymas desperately tries one last time to earn his father's acknowledgement by promising that he will one day bring honor to the family, but his father cuts him off and tells him that this humiliation is exactly what he deserves. He warns Elymas never to use the Edvon family name again, saying that if he ever does, he will personally have him executed. Elymas stands there completely shaken as the surrounding nobles silently side with his father and leave him all alone. Before following behind Elymas's father, Malice gives him one final mocking grin. Later that very day, Elymas is thrown out of the mansion with nothing more than a small pouch containing a few coins to help him survive. As he walks away through the pouring rain, Malice watches him silently from one of the mansion's windows, clearly enjoying the fact that she stole Elymas's position in the family. Sometime later, Elymas arrives in Rondome, a bustling city filled with adventurers hoping to make names for themselves. Elymas's situation is pretty bad right now, and while staying in a small inn, he spends his time brooding over the betrayal, humiliation, and suffering his father put him through over a class. Even so, he never once loses faith in the Heavy Knight class because he knows better than anyone just how overpowered it can become. After calming himself down, he begins comparing the world around him with the memories of the game and quickly realizes that while the classes, skills, and monsters are exactly the same, much of the world's history, geography, and even its cities are completely different. Since he can't rely entirely on his memories anymore, he decides that he will have to carefully research this world as he travels. Before anything else, though, he wants to test his abilities for himself because he'd be in real trouble if the Heavy Knight class wasn't the same as what he remembered in the game. But fortunately, after checking his skill tree, he is relieved to discover that none of the Heavy Knight's skills have changed from the game. There are 3 main ways to invest the 5 skill points you receive at the start, and it's not an exaggeration to say this decision can make or break your career. There's Path of the Heavy Armor, Defense Booster, and Beginner Swordsmanship. Path of the Heavy Armor is considered the weakest of all the Heavy Knight skills in this world because of how limited its applications are. Defense Booster doesn't do much other than grant the user increased defense stats, and Beginner Swordsmanship just lets you use sword skills early on. Most people who got the Heavy Knight class would choose Beginner Swordsmanship, and sure, it has its pros, but having played through this class before, Elymas knows exactly which skill tree grants the best rewards in the long run. He knows that almost nobody ever sticks with Path of the Heavy Armor long enough to discover its true value, and that is exactly why so few people realize how absurdly powerful it eventually becomes. So without hesitation, he invests all of his available skill points into Oath of the Heavy Armor. As he does this, he can immediately feel the effects of the skill tree on his body, and he also gains the skill Rampart Reflection, which is exactly what he needs right now. He then purchases the equipment he will need to begin his journey as a Heavy Knight and sets out into the forest to start his first battle. As he walks through the peaceful scenery, the beautiful surroundings manage to take his mind off everything that happened with his father, if only for a little while, but eventually, he comes across a frog monster hiding in the trees called Arana. The frog leaps at him, so he activates Rampart Reflection, and as the frog slams into his shield, it is blown back and killed on the spot. Rampart Reflection allows Elymas to deal damage equal to his defense to all targets that strike his shield, and although it doesn't work on all types of enemies, against a weak opponent, it's an instant kill. He collects the magic stone from the frog's corpse, and even though it's not worth much, he decides to hold onto it in case he needs it later. Just as the battle was over, he suddenly hears someone screaming for help somewhere deeper in the forest, so without wasting any time, he rushes toward the sound and finds an adventurer surrounded by monsters. The man is shocked that Elymas would actually come to help and immediately asks if he can really handle that many monsters, wondering whether he is some famous adventurer despite how young he looks. Elymas quickly denies that and casually reveals that this is actually his very first time leveling up. The adventurer immediately blurts out that he's hopeless and says there is no way a complete beginner could defeat so many monsters. However, Elymas isn't bothered by his warning because he already understands exactly how these starter monsters behave. Rampart Reflection isn't an unbeatable skill, but as long as the user's defense is high enough, it becomes incredibly powerful. So much so that even against a horde of monsters like this, Elymas has nothing to fear. The adventurer desperately tells Elymas to run away, but Elymas calmly activates Rampart Reflection once again, and as the frogs slam into his shield one after another, the adventurer is left shocked as they all die one after another. He has never seen someone defeat this many Rana all by themselves, so he asks Elymas who he is. Elymas is about to give him his full name, but then he remembers what his father said about never using the family name again, and quite frankly, he doesn't want to have anything to do with that family either. So he simply introduces himself as Elymas, the Heavy Knight. The system suddenly announces that Elymas has leveled up. Hearing that, he immediately opens his status screen to check his updated stats. As he looks through them, he is pleased to see that both his attack and defense have increased by 5 points. It is not a massive boost, but it is enough to make him feel that all of his hard work is finally starting to pay off. Just then, The adventurer Elemis rescued earlier walks over to him and introduces himself as Aris. Aris explains that he came from a small, remote village and left home to chase his dream of becoming an adventurer. However, Elemis has no interest in hearing his sad backstory. Before Aris can continue, Elemis simply turns around and starts walking away. Even so, Aris follows after him and continues trying to thank him for saving his life. Elemis tells him not to worry about it because he did not help him expecting anything in return. The only thing he asks for is permission to keep the magic stones dropped by the monsters they defeated. Aris has no problem with that and immediately agrees, saying they belong to Elemis anyway. As they continue walking, Aris suggests that the two of them should form a party once they get back to town. He assumes Elemis has probably been having a difficult time because the Heavy Knight class has such a terrible reputation among adventurers. Most people see it as a weak and useless class, so they usually avoid recruiting Heavy Knights into their parties. Aris tries to encourage him by saying that, once everyone sees what Elemis is capable of, people will quickly change their minds. He believes Elemis will have no trouble finding a party if he simply gives others the chance to see his true abilities. Despite the offer, Elemis refuses without hesitation. Deep down, he knows Arus is not wrong. The Heavy Knight class performs best when fighting alongside teammates because its main purpose is to protect allies and absorb enemy attacks. However, there is one major problem with that approach. If he joins a party, he will have to split the experience points he earns with everyone else. Since he wants to level up as quickly as possible, sharing experience would only slow down his progress. Elemis has already made up his mind. He is determined to prove that a Heavy Knight can become one of the strongest classes without depending on anyone else. Because of that goal, he knows he cannot afford to waste time or slow down his growth. As the two continue making their way back toward town, Aris keeps talking the entire journey. He repeatedly tells Elemis that he will never reach a high level if he spends all his time hunting weak Rana monsters by himself. According to Aris, there is no future in grinding low-level monsters forever. While Aris continues talking, Elemis suddenly comes to an abrupt stop. A strange feeling washes over him, making him realize that something is secretly watching them. He slowly turns around and carefully scans the surrounding area, trying to figure out where the presence is coming from. Without any warning, a giant spider monster suddenly leaps out from its hiding place. The enormous creature lands in front of them, blocking their path and making it clear that it has no intention of letting them leave without a fight. Elemis immediately activates his appraisal skill to examine the monster. After checking its information, he quickly realizes that the creature's level is nearly twice as high as his own. The difference in strength is so large that this battle could easily become a life-or-death situation. The moment Aris sees the giant spider, he nearly wets his pants in fear. Meanwhile, instead of giving in to fear, Elemis stays calm and immediately starts thinking of a strategy that might allow them to survive. As he studies the monster more carefully, Elemis discovers that it was hiding by using a skill called Creepy Crawly, allowing it to completely conceal its presence until the perfect moment to attack. He also notices that the spider possesses several other dangerous abilities, including Slow Poison, which can gradually weaken its target, and Flaming Claw, a powerful attack capable of dealing devastating damage if it lands. Elemis quickly realizes that his Rampart Reflection skill will not be very useful against this monster. The skill only reflects an attack if his defense is at least as high as the strength of the attack he receives. Since the spider is much stronger than he is, trying to rely on that skill right now would be completely useless. Seeing how dangerous the situation has become, Aris starts blaming himself for leading them into trouble. Even though he is shaking with fear, he gathers the courage to step forward and tells Elemis to run while he stays behind to hold the monster off. Elemis can clearly see that Aris is terrified and barely able to stand, so he calmly walks past him and tells him to leave the fight to him. Without wasting another second, Elemis opens his status screen and decides to invest every single one of his remaining stat points into the Oath of the Heavy Armor skill. As soon as he pours all of his points into it, the skill evolves and unlocks a brand new ability called Disarm. This new skill temporarily lowers an enemy's attack stat by 20% for exactly 1 minute every time it successfully lands. Realizing this might be his only chance, Elemis charges straight at the spider. He knows this is an extremely risky battle where one mistake could get him killed, but those are exactly the kinds of fights that excite him the most. The battle begins immediately, and despite the huge gap in levels, Elemis manages to hold his own against the giant spider for a short time. Even so, he knows he cannot keep defending forever because the monster is still much stronger than he is. Suddenly, the spider summons a magic circle and then fires a poisonous beam directly at him. Instead of dodging, Elemis intentionally lets the attack hit him, causing Aris to panic because he thinks Elemis has just thrown his life away. However, that was part of Elemis's plan all along. The instant the spider lowers its guard, Elemis rushes forward and strikes it with his newly acquired disarm skill. Although the attack itself barely leaves a scratch on the monster, Elemis knows the important part is that the skill has taken effect. The spider's attack has now been reduced by 20%. Angry that its attack failed, the spider immediately activates its Flaming Claw skill and sends the attack right at Elemis. A massive explosion erupts the moment the attack lands, filling the entire area with smoke and debris. Watching from a distance, Aris is convinced that no one could possibly survive an attack like that. Just as he begins to lose hope, Elemis calmly walks out of the smoke without a single serious injury. Before the spider can react, Elemis rushes in once again and lands another successful disarm strike. The effects stack together, now reducing the spider's attack by a total of 40%. Seeing the dramatic drop in the monster's strength, Elemis cannot help but smile. For the first time since the battle began, he realizes that he actually has a real chance of winning. Furious that its prey is still standing, the giant spider lets out a loud screech before charging forward for one final attack. It throws everything it has into one desperate strike, hoping to finish Elemis once and for all. But at the very last second, Elemis activates his Rampart Reflection skill. Now that the spider's attack has been weakened enough, the conditions for the skill are finally met. The monster's own attack is reflected back at it with tremendous force, dealing enough damage to knock the giant spider to the ground and completely turn the battle in Elemis's favor. Elemis slowly walks over to the giant spider as it lies on the ground, its body still twitching from the damage it just received. Without giving it any chance to recover, he raises his weapon and delivers the final blow, killing the monster once and for all. The moment the spider dies, his system immediately lights up with several notifications. It announces that Elemis has successfully reached level 12, earned 4 additional skill points, and unlocks several brand new skills as a reward for leveling up. Before Elemis even has time to process everything, Aris runs over to him in complete disbelief. He cannot believe that Elemis actually managed to defeat a monster that was nearly twice his level all by himself. Seeing everything with his own eyes completely changes Aris's opinion. He finally realizes that Elemis probably does not need a party after all and is more than capable of becoming stronger on his own. Unfortunately, the battle is not completely over for Elemis. The poison from the spider's earlier attack finally begins taking effect, causing his body to weaken with every passing second. Seeing his condition, Aris does everything he can to support him and safely escorts him back to town before the poison gets any worse. Once they finally arrive, the two part ways, and Elemis heads straight home to get some much-needed rest after such an exhausting battle. Though his nap is far from peaceful, as he is still haunted by nightmares of the day he was banished from the royal palace. The following morning, Elemis heads to the Adventurers Guild to officially register as an adventurer. The moment he walks through the front doors, almost everyone inside turns their attention toward him. At first, they are impressed by how impressive and intimidating his armor looks. However, the moment Elemis reveals that his class is Heavy Knight, their opinions immediately change. They begin looking down on him, calling his class useless and dismissing him without giving him a chance to prove himself. Unlike the others, the receptionist treats Elemis with respect. She calmly processes his registration, acknowledges his class without judging him, and approves his guild card. Elemis is genuinely happy because, despite everyone's opinions, he has finally become an official adventurer. However, he quickly learns that he will be starting at the lowest rank, F rank. Thanks to his knowledge from the game, he knows that adventurers below E rank are not allowed to participate in dungeon expeditions unless there is at least one E rank adventurer in the party. On top of that, his current rank also limits the number of skill points he can invest into his Oath of the Heavy Armor skill. After hearing all of this, Elemis realizes that reaching E rank as quickly as possible has now become one of his highest priorities. Hoping to speed up his progress, Elemis asks whether there are any parties looking for new members. Trying not to discourage him, the receptionist politely explains that parties usually have very little demand for defensive classes like Heavy Knights, so it may take some time before someone accepts him. Even though she tries to soften the explanation, the real reason is obvious. Most adventurers simply look down on low-level Heavy Knights and refuse to believe they can contribute anything useful. The atmosphere inside the guild changes completely when Elemis places a large pile of magic stones on the counter and asks to exchange them for rewards. Everyone nearby immediately turns to look, unable to believe what they are seeing. They begin whispering among themselves, convinced that there is no way a level 12 Heavy Knight could have collected that many monster cores honestly. Some even accuse him of cheating because they find it simply unbelievable. Ignoring their accusations, Elemis excitedly asks the receptionist if there are any promotion quests currently available that could help him rank up faster. She shyly tells him that there are indeed a few quests he can take if he is interested. Later that night, the scene shifts to a dark cemetery where several experienced adventurers have gathered together. They are all there because they intend to participate in a special raid quest that has attracted a great deal of attention. As everyone prepares for the mission, the man leading the group suddenly singles Elymas out after hearing that he is only a level 12 heavy knight. Looking down on him, he tells Elymas that a dangerous raid like this is no place for an inexperienced rookie. He also refuses to believe the rumors that Elymas defeated the giant spider by himself. Convinced that Elymas has been lying to make himself look stronger than he really is, the man declares that he is going to teach him a lesson for spreading false stories. Elymas is in a cemetery with a group of adventurers when one of them suddenly speaks up and announces that he heard a clown had joined the raid quest. Gaotan immediately tells everyone that the clown is Elymas, and he warns him that there are plenty of newbies like him who underestimate guilds and monsters. Gaotan points out the fact that Elymas supposedly killed an Ariandype at level 12 and calls the whole story a lie. He tells Elymas that adventuring isn't that easy and promises to teach him a lesson. Elymas thinks the whole situation sucks because he can't afford to miss this raid quest, since raid quests are a rare chance to earn a promotion. So rather than argue, he decides to tell Gaotan that he looks forward to working with him. Gaotan admits he doesn't like Elymas, but says he will accept it for now. Without wasting any more time, Gaotan tells Teal to start searching the area. Teal unsheathes his sword, spins it a couple of times, and activates a skill called Search. Search is a rare detection skill that allows the user to sense nearby creatures, and it is especially uncommon among low-level adventurers. After a few moments, Teal reports that there is a horde of roughly 30 monsters nearby. Gaotan praises him for doing a good job, and Teal immediately takes the opportunity to boast about how exceptional his skill is. He even says that he hopes Gaotan will reward him with a promotion to rank E after today's raid. Teal then turns his attention toward Elymas and tells him that his strange behavior at the guild has sparked all kinds of rumors. He says it would have been impressive if even half of those rumors were true, but unfortunately, Elymas ended up with a defective class. Teal proudly explains that he is a red mage, a class with high physical ability that can also learn offensive magic, healing spells, and a wide variety of support magic. Elymas thanks him for his concern but calmly replies that he is perfectly happy with his own class and has no complaints about it. Teal simply tells him not to slow the rest of the team down before walking away. Elymas watches him leave and thinks to himself that the Heavy Knight class is simply more difficult to understand. At first glance, it doesn't seem nearly as flashy as other classes, and in the game, Heavy Knights were often overlooked because they focused on defense and positioning rather than overwhelming damage. However, this world isn't the game anymore. Naturally, most people gravitate toward classes that are easier to use and produce immediate results, so very few people ever bother to master the more technical classes. Soon afterward, Gaotan gathers everyone together to explain the plan. According to the guild report, the undead horde they are about to fight is led by a ghoul head. Since he is a rank D adventurer, Gaotan decides that he alone will fight the ghoul head while everyone else keeps their distance and deals with the weaker undead. One of the rookies nervously asks whether Gaotan will protect them if things become dangerous, but Gaotan coldly replies that he has no intention of protecting anyone who gets caught in his fight. His answer shocks nearly everyone present. Most of them had assumed they could simply stand behind a high-ranking adventurer and earn an easy promotion, only to discover that Gaotan has no interest in babysitting them. The ghoul head is around level 30. Although it possesses no offensive combat skills, it can use Hades' Breath, a skill that transforms nearby corpses into low-level zombies. Under normal circumstances, the raid should still succeed because they have Gaotan, a level 40 rank D adventurer. If everything goes according to plan, victory should be guaranteed. Unfortunately, the party is filled with inexperienced adventurers who expected the raid to be easy, while their leader has no intention of looking after them. Elymas estimates that everyone's survival odds are around 80%. That might sound like a comfortable success rate in a game, but this isn't a game anymore. In this world, death isn't just a temporary setback. If someone dies here, there are no respawns. Unable to ignore the problem any longer, Elymas walks over to Gaotan and politely suggests that he should give the team more specific instructions. Gaotan asks him to repeat himself, clearly irritated. Elymas explains that the guild report might not be completely accurate, and if they wait until something unexpected happens, it will already be too late to respond. Gaotan becomes visibly annoyed and asks whether Elymas seriously thinks he has the right to order him around. Elymas immediately shakes his head and says no. He explains that he is simply anxious because he and the others are low-level adventurers with very little experience. Bowing respectfully, he tells Gaotan that while this may be routine work for a veteran like him, the rest of the team would greatly appreciate more detailed instructions. Gaotan reluctantly agrees, saying that although he isn't anyone's babysitter, he'll explain things a little more clearly. Before Gaotan can continue, Teal suddenly interrupts him and mocks Elymas, saying that only someone with a defective class would be afraid of a few weak undead. He laughs and says he never expected Elymas to run crying to Gotan right before the battle started. Teal confidently tells Gotan that they don't need any instructions at all, and that cowards should simply stay in the back if they're too scared to fight. At that exact moment, the ground begins to shake. Rotting hands burst through the dirt as undead start crawling out of the graves in every direction. The adventurers freeze in fear as dozens of monsters slowly surround the cemetery, but Elymas calmly draws his sword while Gaotan grips his own weapon and prepares to charge. Moments later, the ghoul head finally appears. The enormous undead lets out a horrifying roar, and Teal immediately collapses onto the ground in terror. Gaotan angrily asks Teal what he thinks he's doing before ordering both Teal and Paul to clear a path for him. Meanwhile, Elymas turns toward the rest of the group and tells them to focus on the ghoul head's followers. The adventurers stare at him in disbelief and ask whether he seriously expects them to charge into an entire horde of undead. They thought Gaotan would wipe them out himself while they watched from safety. Since Gaotan is completely focused on the boss, Elymas finally understands why everyone is hesitating. None of them have ever fought a monster horde before, so their fear is completely understandable. Instead of forcing them to charge recklessly, Elymas tells them to split into teams of 3, because, as long as they protect each other's backs, the undead won't be able to surround them. His calm explanation gives everyone just enough confidence to move, but they still have no clue what to do, so they ask what he plans to do. Elymas calmly replies that he will draw the undead toward himself on the front line, and buy everyone enough time to organize themselves. The others immediately protest, saying that although he seems experienced at dealing with hordes, trying to hold them off alone is far too dangerous. They point out that no one can heal quickly enough to survive that kind of pressure. Before anyone can stop him, one undead suddenly sneaks up behind a frightened adventurer. Elymas instantly rushes forward and activates Parry, using his shield to perfectly deflect the monster's attack before creating an opening with a single movement. 2 more undead immediately rush the group, but Elymas intercepts them as well, parrying each attack before disarming both monsters in rapid succession. As even more undead begin pouring toward them, Elymas activates Rampart Reflection, turning the monster's attacks back against them while effortlessly maintaining the front line. The adventurers are left speechless after watching him wipe out several undead in only a few moments. Elymas calmly tells them not to worry because attracting large groups of enemies is exactly what a heavy knight is supposed to do. He also reminds everyone that if anything unexpected happens, they should immediately warn the others instead of trying to handle it alone. As they watch Elymas effortlessly control most of the battlefield by himself, several of them begin wondering whether he is really just an ordinary heavy knight. A notification suddenly appears before Elymas telling him that he has reached level 16, and Elymas smiles to himself because Parry is proving even more effective than he expected. Fighting large numbers of enemies around this level is an incredibly efficient way to gain experience, and after quickly checking his status, he sees that his stats are steadily increasing. Meanwhile, the rest of the group begins working together much more effectively, supporting one another exactly as Elymas instructed. Some of them quietly wonder whether they should simply stay behind him since he is by far the most dependable person on the battlefield, although several admit that he is starting to scare them even more than the undead themselves. As the battle continues, a few adventurers ask Elymas whether they should help Gaotan fight the ghoul head, but Elymas immediately tells them to stay back because the boss is far above their level. Gaotan should be able to defeat it on his own. At that moment, the ghoul head suddenly leaps toward Gaotan and swings one of its massive claws. Gaotan deflects the attack but is forced backward by the impact, and the ghoul head immediately follows up with another strike, but Gaotan counters with a powerful slash that sends the monster crashing into a nearby building. Before it can recover, he rushes forward and lands another devastating blow to its face, launching it straight through a gravestone. Gaotan pauses for a brief moment to catch his breath, but to his frustration, the ghoul head slowly sits back up and lets out another terrifying roar. Furious, Gaotan yells at it to stay down already. Several undead suddenly latch onto his body, forcing him to shake them off before shouting for Teal and Paul to lure more undead away from him. Teal instinctively jumps backward in fear, prompting Gaotan to call them cowards and threaten to withhold their promotion. Teal nervously replies that they understand, but if they get any closer to the ghoul head, they could easily get caught in the battle and die. They insist they can only support him from the sides. The ghoul head suddenly attempts another ambush by pouncing toward Gaotan, but Gaotan narrowly dodges before activating Rock Shatterer, smashing the monster with tremendous force and dealing massive damage. It looks like the finishing blow is finally within reach, but countless undead continue getting in his way. However, just then, something strange happens. Instead of continuing the fight, the ghoul head begins grabbing nearby undead and shoving them into its mouth. Elemis immediately recognizes the skill as consume corpses, and it is an extremely rare ability that allows a ghoul head to recover health by devouring corpses and undead. However, Elemis quickly notices something unusual. The monster is consuming far more bodies than it should need just to restore its health. As he watches more undead disappear into its mouth, he suddenly realizes what's going on. The ghoul head isn't healing, it's actually evolving. Elemis immediately shouts for Gaotan to stop and get away from the monster, but he is already too late. The ghoul head's body violently mutates before everyone's eyes, its mana surging to an entirely different level. Its size increases dramatically. Its appearance becomes far more grotesque, and its level skyrockets all the way to 40 as it evolves into a mad header. The party is scared at the sight of the evolved ghoul head. Existence evolution is a rare event that occurs only when certain conditions are met, and it primarily refers to monsters awakening latent abilities and transforming into another species to escape sticky situations. Even in Magic World game, the exact conditions for existence evolution weren't clearly stated, but Elemis can only say that they got unlucky. The ghoul head starts charging a green beam in its mouth, and Elemis warns Gaotan not to stand in front of it, but Gaotan doesn't react in time and gets sprayed by the beam. It inflicts a stun effect, leaving him vulnerable to the monster's attacks, and Elemis tells Teal and Paul to distract the ghoul head so it doesn't kill Gaotan, but they ask him what he expects them to do against an evolved ghoul head. It would kill them immediately if they even tried to attack it with magic, but Elemis doesn't care and tells them that if Gaotan dies, all of them will die because none of them are strong enough to face the monster. They need a path to victory, and Gaotan is the only person whose level is close enough to the monster's. But before Elemis can say anything else, the monster punches Gaotan in the abdomen, causing him to vomit blood, and sends him flying several meters across the cemetery. It also inflicts paralysis on him, knocking him unconscious. Paul and Teal hide behind a gravestone, terrified by what just happened to Gaotan. And the monster walks up to him menacingly and winds up its fist to finish him off. But Elemis rushes forward at full speed to get in front of Gaotan and parries the punch that the ghoul head throws at him, though the impact still sends him backward. Elemis tells them that he will draw the ghoul head's attention, and that Teal should cast Heal and Paralysis Heal on Gaotan. But Teal tells him that he has Heal, but doesn't have Paralysis Heal because he spent his skill points increasing his attack. Elemis wonders what kind of half-ass build that is because, back in Magic World game, most people would have gone for a healing-focused build. He tells Teal to take Gaotan somewhere safe and heal him while he distracts the monster, and Teal agrees and hurriedly carries Gaotan away. The monster starts getting impatient and slowly walks toward Elemis. People usually recover from a Mad Header's poison after about 3 minutes, so if Elemis can hold off the ghoul head until then, Gaotan can help him fight it. But Elemis had no idea reality would be so different from the game, and he resolves to fight the evolved ghoul head until Gaotan recovers. The adventurer party thinks that an F-rank adventurer can't fight a monster like that, but one of them doesn't trust Elemis enough to defeat a level 40 monster while he is only level 16, so they decide to book it before he becomes the ghoul head's next meal, and another adventurer tells him to wait for them. Elemis doesn't judge them because they wouldn't last more than 10 seconds if they join the fight, and he can't afford to protect low-rank adventurers while fighting the ghoul head. Teal is so scared of the ghoul head that he is visibly shaking, but Gaotan looks like he is starting to recover. The monster lets out a roar, startling Elemis, but he thinks tactically that since he is level 16 while the Mad Header is level 40, a single mistake means death, yet he still decides to fight. The ghoul head throws a punch, but Elemis manages to evade it, and he decides to rely on strategy since he cannot win in a head-on battle. He makes a break for the grass, and the ghoul head chases after him. But after a short while, it stops and realizes that it can no longer see him. It starts searching frantically, but he remains out of sight. Elemis runs from place to place, using the gravestones as cover, but as he runs past one, the monster happens to hear his footsteps and immediately turns toward the sound. But Elemis manages to escape in time to avoid getting caught. He then throws a stone toward the monster to distract it for a little while, and as the ghoul head turns, he seizes the opportunity and rushes straight at it to cut it down. However, before he could land a hit, the monster reacts and throws a punch at him, forcing him to evade because taking a hit like that head-on would definitely kill him. The monster disappears in less than a second, and now it is Elemis' turn to go looking for it. He starts looking around for the ghoul head, but this time, the monster's ambush works perfectly. and it lands a punch that sends him crashing into a gravestone on the other side of the cemetery. Elemis realizes that the level difference between them is simply too much for him to overcome, and the situation is becoming genuinely dangerous because he realizes he could actually die here. He wanted to avoid situations like this from the very start of the raid, but he never expected to face such a powerful opponent, so he was completely unprepared. It is a high-risk, high-reward situation that is pushing him to his limits, but he has to admit that the high stakes are really getting his blood pumping, and he wouldn't be a man if he gave up now. So he rushes straight at the ghoul head with all the strength he has left, and one of the adventurers is surprised and asks whether the heavy knight is actually managing to hold his own against the ghoul head. But another thinks Elemis is just losing slowly, and it's a miracle he isn't dead yet. Elemis keeps evading the Mad Header's attacks, and he realizes that if he keeps letting it attack freely, it will eventually land a decisive blow. He needs to strike back to keep it in check, so he opens his status window and dumps all of his points into beginner swordsmanship, unlocking a skill called Vital Slice. It allows the user to unleash a powerful slash from point-blank range, making it especially effective against targets with high defense. The ghoul head leaps into the air and punches Elemis, but he parries the attack, slips beneath its leg, and uses Vital Slice on its back. The attack deals very little damage because of the overwhelming level difference. Vital Slice sacrifices the blade's reach, which is why it was considered a defective skill, but its high damage output perfectly complements the low attack, high defense heavy knight. Even so, that alone won't be enough to defeat it. The ghoul head starts throwing punches at Elemis, but he evades every one of them and notices that it's becoming increasingly reckless. The ghoul head gets annoyed and starts punching the ground in frustration, but Elemis tells it that the real fight starts now because his job is done. Gaotan is directly above the ghoul head and unleashes Dragon Slayer Split. Blood gushes out of the monster's eyes, and it lets out one final scream before collapsing dead. The adventurer party celebrates with joy that they managed to live to see another day, but Gaotan looks at Elemis and feels humbled because a mere F rank managed to survive against a monster that nearly killed him. Elemis levels up from level 16 to level 23 but reaches his absolute limit and drops to one knee from exhaustion. He thanks Gaotan for arriving just in time because otherwise he would have died. Gaotan stares at Elemis for a long moment before apologizing to him and admitting that his leadership was inadequate. He had been careless, and Elemis had been right about everything. Elemis is completely dumbfounded that Gaotan is actually apologizing and taking responsibility for his mistakes. Gaotan tells him to take the level 40 magic stone that the boss dropped, and Elemis figures it should be worth quite a lot, so he gladly accepts since he is broke after his cousin from the Branch family took everything he owned. Elemis asks whether he is really okay with it, but Gaotan reassures him that it's only fair since Elemis was the one who defeated the monster. Gaotan takes another look and notices that the ghoul head also dropped an item, and Elemis asks whether he wants it, but Gaotan stands by his decision because he never goes back on his word. Elemis defeated the monster, so the rewards belong to him. Not even a second later, however, Gaotan asks whether Elemis can at least check the item's description, and Elemis gives him a tired look before agreeing. Elemis checks the shield's stats and discovers that it is called the Daemon's Rage Shield and is worth 3 million gold. He reads its abilities and learns that after blocking an attack with the shield, the user's next attack gains an additional 8 attack points. He thinks it's a great item because Rampart Reflection only activates when his armor is struck, but with a shield like this, he could shut down almost any attack around his level before counterattacking. The only problem is that selling something so valuable would be bound to attract a lot of unwanted attention, and attention is the last thing he wants right now. Gaotan gets the look of a greedy-ass man when he hears that it's worth 3 million gold, but the moment Elemis looks at him, he immediately locks in so hard that his head practically shines in the moonlight. Elemis asks Gaotan about his promotion, but Gaotan tells him not to worry because he'll tell the guild that refusing to promote Elemis would be their loss, and they had better do it immediately. He says the guild warned him to make sure Elemis hadn't cheated, but he now realizes that warning was completely misguided, and if anyone objects, he'll knock them out himself. Teal comes over and asks Gaotan whether he can approve his promotion too since it was his heel that got Gaotan back on his feet, but Gaotan yells at Teal because he completely lost his nerve against that monster, so he can't approve it. There will be far greater challenges waiting for him inside dungeons, and he should spend more time taking quests he can actually handle, but even though he's only saying it out of concern, Teal gets upset and storms off. Back at the Adventurers Guild, everyone is chatting when they overhear the receptionist, and they all turn to watch as she pays Elemis 130,000 gold for completing the raid, 200,000 gold for 10 white magic stones, and another 600,000 gold for the ghoul head's evolved Mad Header magic stone. Gaoten laughs that Elymas actually made more money than he did this time, and Elymas says that raids really are one of the fastest ways to make money, but everyone in the guild is shocked that a heavy knight earns so much. The receptionist asks Gaoten whether Elymas really defeated the ghoul head variant. One adventurer says Elymas already raised eyebrows when he brought in high-level magic stones before, while another asks what level he is. Everyone keeps bombarding Gaoten with questions, because they think the idea of a heavy knight defeating a level 40 Mad Hatter is far too unbelievable. But Gaoten slams his hand onto the desk to silence them. He asks how they dare doubt Elymas or insult his judgment for approving the promotion, and the entire guild falls silent as Gaoten glares at everyone with an angry expression. After they finish trading the magic stones and collecting their rewards, Elymas thanks Gaoten for everything he has done for him, and Gaoten appreciates it, so he says they should meet again someday. Thanks to Gaoten stopping everyone from talking behind his back, Elymas has officially been promoted to rank E, and later on, he is wandering through the city thinking about what to do next now that he has reached rank E. At rank E, he can finally enter dungeons and farm gold, but the Rampart Reflection strategy relies on overwhelming defense and only works reliably against beginner enemies. So with his current skill setup, he'll be stuck grinding levels for quite a while. He decides he should start looking for a skill book to determine his future path. The one he wants is the Fang of Smoldering Insanity skill book. Skill books are required to unlock skill trees, but they are incredibly rare, so the chances of finding one are slim. Still, looking costs nothing. Oath of Armor and Fang of Smoldering Insanity are two skill trees complement each other and complete the Heavy Knight class. A completed Heavy Knight is no longer merely a defense specialist, but calling it an offense specialist wouldn't be accurate either. It becomes a human weapon. Fang of Smoldering Insanity is the key to unlocking the Heavy Knight's true potential. This was the end of episode 4. Subscribe to not miss the next part.